We always talk about cybersecurity like it's this constant, never-ending battle against faceless threats. But what if we've been looking at it all wrong? What if it's less of a battle and more of a strategic game? A game you can actually win, not with bigger walls, but with smarter plays.
I mean, you see it in the headlines all the time, right? Two companies get hit with a similar attack. For one, it's just a bump in the road. For the other, it's a total disaster that brings them to their knees. What's the difference?
And that's the secret, right there. The companies that make it through aren't the ones that never face a threat. No, they're the ones with a solid playbook. They get that the goal isn't to get to zero risk, because that's impossible. The goal is to outsmart it.
So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to walk through that very playbook. First, we'll size up the field. Then we'll get into the rules. After that, we'll look at the 4 core moves you can make. And finally, we'll talk about handling the leftovers.
All right, first up, sizing up the field. Look, before you can make any kind of strategic move in any game, you have to know where you are on the board. This is all about getting a brutally honest look at your company's digital health.
And this whole thing, it's really not as scary as it sounds. We all manage risk, literally every single day. You glance outside, check the weather app, and you make a call on the umbrella. Businesses do the exact same thing. It's just that for them, the rain is a potential data breach.
So the fancy term for this is your system risk posture, and I really want you to focus on that framing. It's not some scary vulnerability score, it's a digital health checkup. It's a holistic look at how you're doing, and it's the absolute starting point for any good strategy.
Okay, so once you know where you stand on the field, what's next? Well, you've got to know the rules of the game. And that means your organization has to define what an acceptable level of risk even looks like.
And you do that by setting your risk acceptance criteria. I absolutely love this idea of a budget for risk. It makes so much sense. Just like you can't spend infinite money, you can't spend infinite resources on protection. You have to decide, based on your goals, what you're willing to live with. This sets the ground rules for every decision that follows.
Now, where do these rules come from? Well, companies don't just pull them out of thin air. They usually follow one of 2 major playbooks. On one hand, you have NIST, which is kind of like a detailed step-by-step recipe. On the other, you have ISO, which is more of a systematic approach about building security into the culture of the whole organization. And let's break this down a bit more. NIST's framework is really focused on the nitty-gritty, technical process of getting specific systems authorized and running securely. ISO, on the other hand, takes a step back. It's about weaving security into the very fabric of the whole business. They're just different tools for slightly different jobs.
But here's the really important part. Despite their differences, they're built on the same core logic. I mean, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter which playbook you're using. You still have to figure out what could go wrong, analyze how bad it might be, decide what to do about it, and then keep an eye on things. These steps are universal.
Okay, now for the fun part. This brings us to the most action-packed section of the playbook, making your move. You've sized up the field, you know the rules. Now, when a risk actually pops up on your radar, you basically have 4 fundamental plays you can call.
So, the ball's in your court. The analysis is done. It's time to make a decision. What are your options? Okay, first play. You can just accept the risk. Now, this might sound a little passive, like you're just giving up, but it's actually a super active, strategic decision. It's a calculated choice you make when you realize the cost of fixing some tiny issue is way, way higher than the damage it could ever possibly cause. Play number 2, you can avoid the risk. This is the most drastic move. You're not just patching a hole here, you're shutting down the entire activity that's creating the risk in the first place. You save this play for those really high-stakes situations where the potential consequences are just not worth it.
The third play you can make is to transfer the risk. You can't make the risk itself vanish, but you can offload the financial headache to someone else. And the classic textbook example of this, cybersecurity insurance. You're essentially paying a company to take on the financial hit if something goes wrong.
And finally, we had the play you're probably most familiar with, mitigate. This is what most of us think of when we hear cybersecurity. It's all about taking direct action to make the risk less likely to happen or less damaging if it does. This is your firewalls, your antivirus software, your employee training, the whole shebang.
But here's the catch. No matter which of those 4 plays you make, whether you accept, avoid, transfer, or mitigate, the game's not over. There's always something left on the table, and you have to deal with these leftovers. This is what we call residual risk.
So what exactly is residual risk? I absolutely love this analogy. Imagine you've got the best raincoat money can buy. In a massive storm, you're going to stay pretty dry, but you still might feel a little damp. That dampness, that's the residual risk. It's the little bit that's left over, even after you've put your best protections in place.
And this quote from the source material just hits the nail on the head. You can't protect against everything. It's just not possible. And even if it were, no company could afford it. That's why understanding this leftover risk is just as important as the first move you make.
So let's see how this works in the real world. A company, Tanaka Solutions, knew they couldn't get to zero risk, so they made a classic transfer play. They did a really deep risk assessment so they could get a cyber insurance policy that was tailored specifically to them, moving the financial burden of a breach over to the insurer. It's a textbook strategy for handling those leftovers.
And of course, none of this matters if you don't write it down, right? A good team has a written playbook. So they use tools like a risk register, which is basically a giant list of every single risk. They use a risk report to give the highlights to leadership, and a risk matrix helps everyone visualize which threats are a big deal and which aren't.
So, as we wrap this up, let's just circle back to that big idea from the beginning. Smart cybersecurity isn't about chasing the impossible dream of zero risk. It's about getting to a place where every risk is on your radar. It's understood, it's being managed with a clear strategy, and whatever is left over is accepted with eyes wide open. So I'll leave you with this. Now that you know the plays, the next time you see a headline about some big cyber threat or a data breach, you won't just see chaos, you'll see a game in progress. And you'll be able to ask yourself, what was their play? And what would I have done differently?